The Meno of Plato, which we shall now consider, is usually thought to be a dialogue from the latter part of Plato's early period, or relatively one of the early dialogues from Plato's middle period. Unlike most of Plato's dialogues, in which Socrates questions someone about the meaning of a general concept, in the dialogue, the Meno himself begins by posing Socrates an interestingly difficult question. Meno asks, "Can you tell me, Socrates, can virtue be taught? Or is it not teachable, but the result of practice? Or is it neither of these, but men possess it by nature or in some other way?" This question is an important one, not only for purely theoretical or abstract reasons, but in deciding as a practical matter, for example, how we can in fact raise children and how to administer the law or other social policy concerns. If virtue is not teachable, then there is no hope of reforming or even trying to rehabilitate criminals, at least not as an effort aimed at making them become virtuous. Nor does it make sense in that case to try to educate children to be virtuous. So if virtue is unteachable in principle, then no matter what teaching method is applied, virtuous citizens cannot be made out of persons who would otherwise be unvirtuous. Some people nowadays refer to the question of Meno as the problem between nature and nurture. To put the question in modern terms, which Socrates would not certainly immediately recognize, we might ask whether being good and acting with a sense of moral responsibility is in fact embedded in our DNA, or is it part of a learned behavior? If virtue is genetic or acquired exclusively through heredity, or what Meno would call possess it by nature, or possessed by nature, then it may be a waste of time trying to teach people to be good. They will either be virtuous or not, just as they will either have blue eyes or not. Their complexion will be dark or not. If, on the other hand, virtue is something for which persons can be taught or trained, then we open up the possibility of discovering how this might be done and the kind of training or education that might enable a person to improve their moral behavior. Meno, we should note, is not really a very fictional character. He is a historical figure known to the Athenians of his time as a scoundrel who betrayed the city during its war with the Persians. There is therefore more than a touch of irony in the fact that in Plato's dialogue, Meno, of all persons, he is the one who approaches Socrates with this question. And Socrates does not try to simply answer the question with a yes or a no, but claims that he cannot even begin to address the problem. Far from knowing whether or not virtue can be taught or acquired in a different manner, Socrates insists that he does not know even what is meant by the concept of virtue. And here we take note of the word concept. It is from the Latin word conceptus, which means to conceive or to create. Hence, cannot intelligibly decide how it is that some persons rather than others become virtues. To know whether virtue can be taught, what properties virtue has, Socrates claims that he would first need to know what virtue is, something which he freely admits he does not know. For Socrates, to understand the concept of virtue would require the ability to define the idea of virtue exactly. It would be necessary then to specify the stuff and conditions for virtue, the general requirements that must be satisfied in order for something to qualify as virtue. Socrates holds Meno at bay here with characteristic irony, indicating that the question is presumptuous, a sign of Meno's audaciousness as a Thessalian, demanding a bold and grand answer to any questions posed. He credits the Thessalians with a reputation for great horsemanship and maintains that now, given the kind of question Meno has raised, they will also earn an equal reputation for wisdom. Of course, Socrates is being ironic and not speaking literally. He intends the opposite of what he has said, for he thinks that to put forward a question of this sort without first determining the meaning of the concept of virtue is a sign of folly. Socrates emphasizes the point when he offers this cautious reply. If then you want to ask one of us that sort of question, everyone will laugh and say, "Good stranger, you must think me happy indeed if you think I know whether virtue can be taught or how it comes to be. I am so far from knowing whether virtue can be taught or not, that I do not even have any knowledge of what virtue itself is." When Meno expresses his surprise at Socrates' reluctance to answer his question, and at Socrates' assertion that the citizens of Athens are equally too lacking in wisdom to help solve the problem, Socrates indicates that he is also in precisely the same situation, unable to explain whether virtue can be taught because he does not fully understand what virtue is. And so he is not in any position to say what special properties virtue has or does not have. Socrates adds, "I myself, Meno, am poor as my fellow citizens in this matter, and I blame myself for my complete ignorance about virtue. If I do not know what something is, how could I know what qualities it possesses? Or do you think that someone who does not know at all who Meno is could know whether he is good looking, or rich, or well born, or the opposite of these? Do you think that is possible?" Socrates' question, especially the final one, is rhetorical, one for which he expects no answer. He claims not only that he personally does not know what virtue is, but that he has never met anyone who does. He states that he can no more know whether virtue can be taught unless or until he knows what virtue is than someone who could know whether Meno was handsome without first knowing who Meno is. without being able to recognize him and even distinguish him from others. It is only after we know what something is, Socrates argues, that we can ask what properties it has or does not have. The Socratic elenchus is engaged in order to uncover the meaning of these kinds of concepts, but the dialectic or the exchange of questions and answers almost always ends in a recognition of what we do not yet know. Among the persons whom Socrates criticizes as claiming to know but not actually knowing, he actually has special interest with the sophists who taught rhetoric for a fee in Athens and in the ancient Greek colonies. In particular, Socrates mentions Gorgias, an itinerant rhetorician with whom Meno had studied, as someone who does not understand the concept of virtue. The sophists are criticized in Plato's dialogues quite ostensibly because they charge money for their lessons, although there appears to be another philosophically more interesting reason. Socrates had inherited a modest sum after the death of his father, on which he was able to live within his limited means by simplifying his needs and working occasionally as a stone cutter. Socrates had a wife and several children, some of which he sired late in life, and one of whom was still a child when Socrates was brought to trial at the age of 70. He might also have been able to teach students for a fee like the sophists, but disdained doing so. The fact that sophists, including Gorgias, as one of the most famous of their profession, charged tuition for their lessons was the only reason why Socrates and Plato was not the only reason why Socrates and Plato found the sophists objectionable. The ancient Greek world was democratic in political structure, and its citizens could distinguish themselves and earn respect, power, position, and wealth by skillfully speaking in public. The sophists promised to teach these abilities to aspiring orators, concentrating on methods of persuading an audience and moving them by argument, emotional appeal, and clever rhetorical tricks. The deeper reason why Socrates and Plato objected to the sophists was that they used methods of philosophical argument not as a mode of inquiry for discovering the truth, letting the best argument prevail, and following its conclusions wherever they led, but instead, the sophists proliferated the use of dialectical techniques as a method of advocacy, of supporting any position, regardless of its truth or falsehood. We have seen this already when Socrates tried to defend himself in the Athenian court and speaking not in the language of the lawyers, but of himself or his normal language. One of the most revealing lessons of the sophists was to encourage students to defend either side of a contradictory dispute, like lawyers or like rhetoricians. A good sophist was able to hold up either side of the argument with equal effectiveness, suggesting that there was no more to the truth of any matter than pure persuasiveness with which a case could be presented. The sophists, in doing so, often relied on polemical devices in the service of spurious argument to support conclusions that the orator did not personally believe. This aspect of sophism was very objectionable to Socrates and Plato, who thought that philosophy and its methods of argumentation should actually serve the truth. Philosophy, therefore, is not only a matter of argumentation or debate, but of really knowing the truth. That's it for this section on whether virtue can be taught and how Socrates is understanding it. Thank you for listening. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to this channel, Samo't Sari sa Simula. Thank you very much and see you until the next recording.